Vince McMahon returns and helps Roman Reigns defeat CM Punk at WWE WrestleMania 42. Vince McMahon just walked back into a WWE arena and the internet is absolutely losing its mind. And before you say a single word, before you type one comment about whether this was right or wrong, whether this should have happened or not, you are going to watch every second of this video. Because what went down at WrestleMania 42 between Roman Reigns and CM Punk was already the most anticipated match of the entire year. And then Vince McMahon's music hit. And the building didn't just explode, it fractured. Half the arena erupted. The other half couldn't believe what their eyes were showing them. And CM Punk? CM Punk stood in that ring and watched the one man he has spent the better part of 2 decades defining himself against walk out from behind that curtain, and for the first time in a very long time, the voice of the voiceless had absolutely nothing to say. That image alone should tell you everything about how significant, how seismic, and how deeply controversial what happened at WrestleMania 42 truly is. This was not a surprise appearance. This was not a nostalgic cameo. This was Vince McMahon making a calculated, deliberate return to the biggest stage in professional wrestling and doing it in the most personally devastating way possible for one specific man. To truly understand the magnitude of what Vince McMahon's return meant at WrestleMania 42, you first have to understand what was happening inside that ring before he ever appeared. Roman Reigns and CM Punk had been delivering an absolute masterpiece. Everything that had been promised in the weeks of build, every promo, every confrontation, every layer of personal history between two men who represent completely opposing philosophies about what professional wrestling is and what it should be, all of it was being paid off in real time on the grandest stage WWE has to offer. Punk was controlling the narrative early, and that should not surprise anyone. CM Punk at WrestleMania, in a main event, with a personal score to settle, is one of the most dangerous performers the wrestling world has ever seen. He was precise. He was deliberate. He was working Roman's body with the kind of calculated patience that only someone who has spent years studying Reigns' physical vulnerabilities could manage. Roman, for his part, was doing what Roman does, absorbing punishment, surviving, waiting for his moment with the terrifying patience of a man who has been the most dominant force in WWE for the better part of half a decade. The tribal chief does not panic. He endures. He calculates. And when his opening comes, he converts. The crowd was completely split. Half of them chanting for Punk, half of them behind Roman, a genuine, organic, electric division that you simply cannot manufacture or script no matter how talented your creative team is. This was real audience investment in both men. This was WrestleMania working at its absolute highest level. And then, the music hit. No one in that arena, not the performers, not the officials, not the production staff who theoretically should have known everything happening that night, appeared fully prepared for the visceral reality of Vince McMahon walking through that curtain. Because knowing something is going to happen and experiencing it in a live arena surrounded by 70,000 people are two categorically different things. The sound that erupted from that crowd was unlike anything that building had produced all night. Not a pop. Not a reaction. Something more primal than either of those words can capture. A collective shock wave of noise that was simultaneously a roar of recognition, a gasp of disbelief, and an eruption of pure, complicated, overwhelming emotion. Vince McMahon looked, and this is the detail that every single person who was in that building is going to be talking about for the rest of their lives, like he had never left. The walk was the same. The posture was the same. The absolute unshakable certainty of a man who believes, at a cellular level, that he belongs in that space more than any other human being alive, completely intact, completely present, completely Vince. The suit was immaculate. The jaw was set. And those eyes, the eyes that have looked across a negotiating table and broken careers, that have stared down billionaires and promoters and athletes and never once blinked, were fixed on the ring with an expression that carried the full weight of everything this moment represented. CM Punk saw him first. And the look on Punk's face in that fraction of a second before the professional mask reasserted itself, before the performer took control back from the person, was the most honest thing CM Punk has shown the world in years. It was recognition. It was history. It was the specific kind of fear that only comes from a source that is deeply personal. Roman Reigns, to the absolute shock of nobody who understands the relationship between these two men and the history of the Bloodline era, did not look surprised at all. Let's be precise here, because the details matter and this moment deserves to be documented accurately. Vince McMahon did not run to the ring. He did not sprint down that aisle with the desperation of a man making a reckless decision. He walked, deliberately, taking his time, letting every camera find him, letting the full reality of his presence register with the audience, the commentators, and most importantly, with CM Punk standing in that ring trying to process what was unfolding while simultaneously keeping track of a man who had just taken everything Roman Reigns had to give and was still standing. That is the detail that makes this so devastating for Punk. He was winning. By every measure of that match, at the moment Vince's music hit, CM Punk was in control of his WrestleMania main event. He had done the work. He had executed the game plan. He had the tribal chief precisely where he needed him, and then the landscape shifted beneath his feet in the most personal way imaginable. The sequence of events from Vince's appearance to the final pinfall happened with the kind of precision that speaks to extensive planning. This was not improvised. Every beat was choreographed by people who understand dramatic timing at the highest level. Vince reaching ringside. The momentary distraction it created involuntary, instinctive, impossible for even a performer of Punk's experience and mental discipline to fully suppress. Roman seizing that fraction of a second with the ruthless efficiency of a man who has built his entire career on converting minimal openings into maximum damage. The spear connected with a force that the camera barely contained. The crowd erupted and fractured simultaneously. And as Roman covered Punk, Vince McMahon stood at ringside with an expression that defied simple categorization, somewhere between satisfaction and vindication, and something darker and more complicated than either of those words. The 3 count landed. WrestleMania 42 had its main event result. And professional wrestling had its most controversial moment in years. The match result is significant. But CM Punk's reaction in the moments following that final pinfall is where the real story lies. Punk did not immediately explode. He did not charge at Vince McMahon or launch into an uncontrolled tirade. He did something far more revealing and far more powerful. He sat up from the mat, looked at Vince McMahon standing there at ringside, and simply stared. For a long moment that the cameras held and the crowd recognized as something genuine and raw, CM Punk stared at the man who just cost him WrestleMania. And in that stare was every pipe bomb, every work-shoot promo, every real departure, every bitter return, every complicated chapter of a relationship between a performer and a promoter that has never been simple, never been clean, and never been anything less than the most fascinating ongoing narrative in professional wrestling history. CM Punk built his entire persona, his entire brand, his entire legacy in this industry on the idea that he was the man brave enough to say what everyone else was too afraid to say, that he was the authentic voice in a world of manufactured characters, that his anger at the machine, at the system, at the man who ran it was real. And now the man who ran it had just walked back into his WrestleMania and taken his moment away. Publicly, deliberately, unapologetically. The most important question in professional wrestling right now is not whether Roman Reigns is still the tribal chief. It is whether CM Punk can survive having Vince McMahon back in his orbit and what the most dangerous, most articulate, most genuinely furious performer in WWE history does in response. This is the conversation that goes far beyond WrestleMania 42, far beyond Roman Reigns versus CM Punk, far beyond any championship or any single storyline. Vince McMahon returning to WWE in any capacity, in any context, with any level of involvement is the most polarizing development this industry has seen in modern memory. And the reasons for that polarization are not simple, and they are not ones that can be dismissed or minimized. The documented history of what led to Vince McMahon's departure from WWE, the investigations, the settlements, the congressional inquiry, the Netflix documentary, all of that exists. All of that is real. All of that is part of the context in which this return must be evaluated. And the wrestling audience, smarter, more informed, more willing to hold institutions accountable than any previous generation of fans, is not going to simply set the context aside because the music hit and the walk was the same. There are going to be sponsors asking questions. There are going to be media organizations demanding responses. There are going to be people, important people with real influence, who look at what happened at WrestleMania 42 and ask WWE very directly what message they believe they are sending. And WWE is going to have to answer those questions. Every single one of them. What we saw at WrestleMania 42 may be the most dramatically compelling moment WWE has produced in years. It is simultaneously one of the most complicated and consequential decisions the company has made in that same time frame. Those two things are both true. They exist together. And the wrestling audience deserves to hold both of them in mind at the same time rather than allowing the spectacle to completely overwhelm the context. Roman Reigns walks out of WrestleMania 42 victorious. But the nature of that victory, assisted, complicated, built on the foundation of Vince McMahon's return, raises questions about what it means for his legacy going forward. The tribal chief has always operated in moral ambiguity. That is the character. But this particular ambiguity has real-world weight attached to it that previous bloodline storylines did not carry. Seth Rollins, the Usos, the entire extended bloodline network, every one of them now has to reckon with what it means if Vince McMahon is a force aligned with Roman's interests. That changes the power dynamic of every relationship in WWE's main event scene. And CM Punk gets a rematch. That is inevitable. That is the only logical next step for this story. But the rematch will not just be about the championship. It will be about everything that Vince McMahon's appearance at WrestleMania represents for a man whose entire career has been defined by his relationship to that one figure. The promo CM Punk delivers when he gets a microphone in his hands after WrestleMania 42 may be the most important promo of his career. And that is not a sentence anyone would have expected to write given the extraordinary heights his previous microphone work has already reached. This is the biggest story in wrestling right now. And it is only going to get bigger, more complicated, and more significant over the coming weeks. Drop your reaction in the comments immediately. Were you in that arena? What was the atmosphere like when Vince's music hit? Do you think this return was right? Do you think CM Punk deserved better? Do you think Roman needed the help? Every comment matters. Every share matters. Because this story needs to be discussed honestly, loudly, and by every wrestling fan who believes this industry deserves that kind of serious engagement. I'm Wrestling News CC. Wrestlemania 42 just changed everything, and we will be here for every single second of what comes next.